We're at the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles, where we're about to meet with Rabbi Abraham Cooper, the Associate Dean, who just visited Germany. Simon Wiesenthal, as I'm sure you know, is the most famous Nazi hunter in the world, and the center named after him fights for human rights today. So we're going to find out, is Germany taking the right steps to undo the sins of the past? So you were just in Germany. Can you tell us what you did there?
I spent 3 days in Berlin recently because we're obviously at a crossroads really for Germany's future. A lot of changes on the ground, and unfortunately I think for the Jewish community in Germany, many challenges from different quarters. And I want to get a sense for the political changes, meet a couple of the people of one of the leaders in the Green Party, obviously SPD and the Conservatives. And I also had a chance to sit down for a short 3-hour talk with our phenomenal ambassador, Rick Grenell, in Berlin, who I think in a lot of ways is the secret weapon there.
So what do you think are the main challenges there for the Jewish community and the German-Israel relationship?
For the Jewish community, we have 3 separate areas of profound concern. We want to call the traditional Nazis, neo-Nazis, far-right, xenophobic, ultra-nationalists, which is also part of an overall trend in Europe. But obviously, when you talk about Germany or Austria, it resonates in a much more profound way. Secondly, we have a massive influx of Arab and Muslim people coming, who are bringing with them baggage from the societies they came that is anti-Semitic. Besides being anti-Israel, it's anti-Jewish. Their challenge to German society is not only about Jews. They have a lot to learn about how to treat women, how to view other religions, people who have no religion, with many people in Germany who see freedom of religion means freedom from religion. But for our concerns, you have young Muslims who at home hear only things that are negative about Jews. In fact, probably the dirtiest word you can say to someone in their circles is to call them a Jew. That's just the truth. The third area is something that I think Germany has been slow to even consider and debate, and that's the anti-Semitism that comes from the left. Generally speaking, over the decades, I mean, what do you mean? I'm liberal, I'm progressive, and the Nazis are far right, so we couldn't possibly be guilty of anti-Semitism. When you look at the statistics of important polls that are actually taken at the beginning of this decade, we estimate, based on polling, a lot of it taken in Germany, that over 150 million Europeans believe that Israel is doing to the Palestinians what the Nazis did to the Jews.
There is a tendency in Germany and among members of the German government to equate Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, which means that criticism of Islam and the anti-Semitism in Islam is considered a problem. Can you equate Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and is that a problem?
Well, I think if we have to be honest about the definition of Islamophobia, if, unfortunately, as many people consider Islamophobia any criticism of people who invoke Islam to legitimize what they do, then I think we are in trouble. There are people who hate Muslims, who want to get them out of Germany, who are prepared to desecrate their holy books and do terrible things. And I think it's important for the governments across the world, including obviously in this side of the Atlantic, to monitor the situation and take appropriate steps. But to equate or conflate the two is, you know, if it wasn't so tragic, it would be a joke. One of the Länder that compile their own statistics on hate crimes, because the federales do it, and you have the Landers, the states. They admitted in a report which we saw that when they weren't sure, if the police didn't designate what kind of crime, who was behind it, they just threw it into the neo-Nazis. When in doubt, give it to the swastika. Understandable, but what that really did was to artificially deflate the number of incidents that unfortunately were perpetrated by Muslims. And then the other, piece of it obviously is, I think many Germans were hoping that by bringing in so many Muslim and Arab migrants to Germany, when so many other countries said no, that this would really put a positive new face. Germany in the 21st century would remember it for this amazing humanitarian gesture, despite some minor problems that may accompany it. So that means that there are a lot of forces at work in Germany that don't want to focus per se on the problem, but want to say, yes, just like we have commitment on anti-Semitism, we're going to monitor Islamophobia. And I think the most important thing for the anti-Semitism czars, besides the statistics, which we have to operate from, is to remind contemporary Germany that you have to deal with this litmus test. You can't sweep it aside. You can't say tisk tisk and spare us another memorial to dead Jews if you're not prepared to respect and defend live Jews. I have to also, for full disclosure, it's been probably 5 years, maybe a little longer. It was the day after the Brandenburg Gate demonstration on behalf of Israel, which the Chancellor participated in. I arrived that night. I don't need to come to celebrations. I have to deal with problems. I met the next day with Heiko Maas, who was then the Justice Minister. And I said, I only have one question for you. And this is 5 years ago, before massive influx. What is Germany doing about dealing with the anti-Semitic baggage that so many of the new migrants to Germany are bringing with them? He didn't have an answer then. The next time I asked for a meeting, I got the next year. They came with 6 lawyers. And I would say also in the case now, Heiko Maas, someone who said publicly that he went into politics because of the lessons of Auschwitz. He's yet, I think, to connect all of the dots, and that's true domestically, and it's also true as he is the chief cheerleader of close relations with the Iranians. But the bottom line is, this is not just about politicians, it's about the media, and the media holding up a mirror to some of its earlier tendencies. And I think the media is as good as admitting problems and failings as we all are individually, which means not at all. The other areas that anti-Semitism, obviously hate crimes, people get beaten up, but also the negative attitudes that are pretty much embedded in Germany about big bad Israel beating up the Palestinians and other Arabs. That isn't undone in a day, and I'm not sure, I'm not an expert on German media, but I think that takes some significant undoing. I mean, there are obviously major publications like Bild and others that never drank the Kool-Aid and are important resources. But if we're looking to change attitudes, we need to read not only the readers of the Bild, but the people who are from the center and the center left.
You mentioned that you met with several political parties. Did you meet with the AfD? Because the Jewish community, the mainstream Jewish community, has a policy of not speaking with them, although they have a Jewish faction now that supports them.
I did not meet with them. I would say that this issue of meeting with far-right parties is a huge challenge, especially for the State of Israel. In some ways, an NGO like the Wiesenthal Center has the luxury of saying, no, thank you. At this stage, we're not prepared to meet with you because of X, Y, and Z. Now, it is interesting next door in Austria, you've got a 32-year-old Chancellor, Kurz, who has similar mix in terms of his political backing. But what's very, very interesting with Kurz, he did it to two people. Number one, he did something that no German leader has ever done. You know, those stand-up press conferences when you have a world leader? So he had Rouhani with him from Iran. He called out his Holocaust denial right to his face in front of the media. He had Erdogan a few weeks later. He called out his anti-Semitism, you know, right there. So, you know, you have to take note of these moments of leadership while you have your eyes wide open that some of the supporters of that coalition sing Nazi songs when they go to college, and probably you know, feel it's just too bad that the wrong people won in the Second World War. On the other hand, the State of Israel is up against it with the EU, and could understand on a certain level that whoever is the prime minister or will be the prime minister of Israel, they may not have as much of a luxury to say, I'm not going to talk to X, Y, and Z, when maybe 4, 5, 6, 10 countries may be led by coalitions. It's a very, very tough call for the governments, but right now it was never under consideration during my visit to meet with these people. We'll have to see what happens in the future. So we stuck with the main parties. One of the issues that I raised over and over again, and I'm known to do that when I go to places, the very unpopular issue of UNRWA. Germany has doubled its funding of the UNRWA efforts in the Palestinian world, including obviously the education of many, many hundreds of thousands of youngsters. And we've been calling for a reform of UNRWA and a reform of their curriculum, which is a disaster. And all we're asking that you do is get an independent academic, take a look at the books and the workbooks that kids are given in Gaza and on the West Bank and around the Arab world, and you'll see that right now you're funding the brainwashing of another generation of Palestinian children, guaranteeing, unfortunately, that we'll have another generation of fighting. But right now, I think we have a lot of reason to be concerned, and you know, we're looking at a great leader who's about to walk off the world stage in less than 3 years. She's announced that she's lame duck. And I think she has been saying all the right things, but in terms of, we say in Yiddish, tachlis, real action to deal with these challenges, it's been either talk or evasion.
We've just been shown a picture of President Steinmeier visiting the Museum of Tolerance, right. And just recently he was criticized by the Simon Wiesenthal Center for celebrating the Iranian Revolution. And it's a question that I have even living there, because I do really enjoy living in Germany. I think it's a great country, but how do you go from claiming to be so repentant over the Holocaust to celebrating a genocidal regime like Iran, to giving money to schools that teach horrible anti-Semitism? It is just something that it's hard for me to explain and wrap my head around. Yeah,
it's a challenge for me as well. Look, I think, first of all, President Steinmeier, he came with also a delegation from the Bundestag, and in addition to his touring the Museum of Tolerance, we had an hour and a half together with some of our leadership in the Jewish community. And I must say, to his credit, he fielded all of the questions. I think when I raised UNRWA, I saw 2 members of the Bundestag put their hands in their face. And then when I raised Iran, the other half of the delegation sort of slinked under the table. He didn't. He was articulate, to the point. I can't give this, I'm not allowed to give the specifics of the meeting, but this was shortly after the U.S. made its move, and I think he said, even, you know, publicly, that he wasn't really sure that the Europeans would find a way around the U.S. Sanctions, and this was a person who was in charge of that effort for 3 years. So in his case, maybe part of it is that he has so much time and effort invested in this process that it's hard to let go, but it just isn't good enough. You know, this is not just about Jews. If you live in Berlin, in many ways, one of the most progressive in terms also of the art and the architecture, it's just unbelievable. It's an amazing city. But when you're in Berlin and you get the reports out of Iran of their hanging gays publicly in Tehran and what they do to dissidents, and there is a profound disconnect. And I'm sorry to report that, you know, I've been around here long enough. We can rewind the reel to the early 90s, leading up to the first Gulf War with Saddam Hussein. We published 2 studies on dual-use technology and who provided it to Saddam's regime, including poison gas. By the way, the U.S. government was involved in turning over some materials too. So we named many firms, 360 plus from around the world. We were never sued. But the single largest group of companies that ran to do business with Saddam, eyes wide open, on dual usage, was Germany. So there is a tradition, I guess it's export uber alles, and it is, I think, shall we say, a flaw in a country that, in a nation that wants to, I won't use the word regain, but gain leadership as in the international arena, to sort of just default to that, you know, sort of never land where you'll say all the right things to the victims the morning after and do zero to stop it from happening again. It is quite disappointing. And by the way, it's nothing to do with left or right politically. It seems to be embedded into the, you know, into the system.
You mentioned the 3 sources of concern for the Jewish community: the Nazi sympathizing right, Arab Muslim population, and the left. Can you rank them? Is there a point that should
That's a very
be
good
more
question.
concerning to
I
us?
think first, maybe the invisible form, which also makes it the most difficult to fight, is the impact of the media's drumbeat, anti-Israel drumbeat in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, where day in and day out, they're Goliath, the Palestinians are the poor David. A chance to say Jews are just as terrible as we were at our worst, whether that is even justifiable or not. So reversing that, to even use terms like colonialization, etc. It also reminds me of the Dry Bones cartoon, right? Berlin, 1938, Jews to Palestine. Berlin, 2018, Jews out of Palestine. So I think in some ways that's the most difficult one to tackle. As far as the Arab and Muslim population, I really think that has to do with the political and social will of other Germans. If the price of admission and of full integration is you're just going to have to learn how to treat women with respect in public, we don't care what you say at home or do. But if you're in a public place on New Year's Eve, no shenanigans, and if you do, you may find yourself on the first flight out of here. I think if you send a strong signal, along with a full commitment of integration, then there's some hope. If you don't do that, I'm very, very pessimistic. And as far as the far right is concerned, look, the further away we get from the horrors of the Holocaust and World War II, the easier it is for people who want to rewrite the script and say, well, he really wasn't all that bad, and there were really good things that happened. Look at the Autobahn and blah, blah, blah. It's going to take a concerted commitment to make sure that everyone living in Germany, including native-born Germans and Arabs and Muslims, understand what the Third Reich did, and unfortunately, first and foremost, to the Jews. And again, if someone says, I don't want my kid going to a concentration camp because it's going to upset me because I hate Jews, I think the system has to say tough.
There was an exhibition about Israel and Israel's founding, and there was a whole section on Nazi appreciation of Arab nationalism. And
well, yeah, not only appreciation, but identification and maybe manipulation thereof. Speak to the Iraqi Jews whose loved ones didn't survive pogroms during World War II in Iraq.
My Iraqi ancestors.
Right? The Nazis were directly there. Obviously, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and all that in real time, in not only after the Holocaust. The Grand Mufti was one of the main cheerleaders for genocide of the Jewish people in the world during World War II and paid no price for it. He visited death camps. He helped raise armies to fight, on behalf of Hitler's cause. So he was a true cheerleader of genocide. I have no doubt, if God forbid, if the German military ever reached Israel, we know exactly what role he would have played.
Do you think the Palestinian movement today has inherited this desire for Jewish genocide from the Grand Mufti, who was the head of the Palestinian movement at his time?
Well, we know from the pre-1948 history that there were many voices, powerful voices, in the Arab world that didn't necessarily see the Jews as a threat. King Hussein, who was a teenager, on the Temple Mount, he was standing next to his grandfather when he was assassinated for deigning to talk about the possibility of living in peace with the Jews. So I think obviously that is a factor. On the other hand, I happen to know a lot of Palestinians, kind of call them the normals. They're nowhere near the levers of power, but there are people who want very much to get on with their lives, to live in peace, and to figure this all out. Until such time as the world sort of gives them their chance to take the reins of power among the Palestinians, I don't think there's going to be much hope. But again, when you talk to different people, and I spend a lot of time in the Gulf, and I've been as far away as Indonesia and the Sudan, you look in the Quran, you can find pretty much whatever it is that you're looking for. So the changes that we need in attitudes from Muslims, not just Palestinians, those reforms, there's no Christian or Jew that can impact one whit on it. But there are strong, moderate voices in the Muslim world. They're not necessarily linked to each other, who could make a difference. So in some ways it's a race against time between the normals and the people who want to sort of just destroy everything. Against that grid, think about some of the great things Germany could achieve if it just sort of taken its game plan, I guess, written back in the 70s and 80s, throw it out and start all over again. There's a lot they can do to help bring those, to help strengthen those options and opportunities and really help in the peacemaking.
Now, I know you're not a mind reader, but what do you think motivates Germany to stick so closely to the Iran deal, to up funding to UNRWA when President Trump pulled the funding out?
Yeah, I think part of it is they're really uncomfortable with the United States. They've, in some ways, have had it. Now, on the one hand, they like the fact that the United States has spent hundreds of billions of dollars to make sure that the Russians don't do to Germany what they've now done to eastern Ukraine. They like that part. They like being partners in NATO. They just don't really want to be lectured to anymore. So they like the good stuff, and they like the fact that until this president came along, where he's calling out some, disconcerting and uncomfortable truths, they really don't like him. They really don't like Ambassador Grenell for his tweets because, Grenell's intervention is what stopped the Iranian airlines from landing over and over again inside of Germany and offloading who knows whom to go. So they really don't like America bullying them. They want to really shine in their own way. And if it means poking the United States in the eye once in a while, like with the Iranian deal, They will, but I really believe that it's not just a matter of trying to be independent, it's a matter of contracts and money. That is the bottom line. And again, we've criticized Steinmeier, we've criticized the Chancellor, but the truth is it's been this way for the last 30 years in Germany. And I don't know what it'll take to change it, but we do know one thing: when we see it, we have to blow the whistle loud, with respect, but directly.
Now, going off the political topic, I'm in Los Angeles. My mother would have never visited Berlin had I not lived there. Her friends from the Jewish community in the synagogue still can't understand why I live there, why I would want to live there. I still hear from a lot of people they don't want to visit Germany, they'll never spend a cent there. Do you think that is an approach we can overcome, that maybe it's time we let go of the resentment and begin to develop friendships with Germans, begin to develop a relationship with the culture today and tourism today and the people today, so that we can heal together? Or should we continue to hold on and always hold them accountable, which we should, but in a harsh, kind of unforgiving way?
It's a very complicated question. I think Israelis overall have answered in a practical way. You have more and more Israeli tourists. You can hear a lot of Hebrew on the street when you're in Berlin from tourists. A large number of Israelis who visit. There's a significant Israeli Jewish population in Germany. I think for people who lost their families and have no extended family because of what Germany did in the Holocaust, I think it would be asking too much for them to sort of go out of their way to look for friends who are German. On the other hand, Germany is now in its seventh decade of being a democracy. Generally speaking, has been a friend of Israel, and Israel needs friends. I think, will Germany just someday just be another European country for Jews? No, not as far as I can see. But I think what informs me a little bit is something I saw in Simon Wiesenthal. Now, he lost 89 members of his family. He wasn't strong enough to stand when the American soldiers came to Mauthausen and saved him in May 1945. He invested his trust in the next generation of Germans. I saw it myself at the airport, where people would come over with folded pieces of white, paper, and open it up. It would be, "My father won't tell me what he did in the war. This is his name, date of birth. Can you please let me know?" It happened a lot. So I do work for the Simon Wiesenthal Center. I've been here for 4 decades. I have to look back to Mr. Wiesenthal's example and say that if somehow he had it within him to sort of live by the Jewish dictum that you don't hold children culpable for the crimes of their parents, that's, I think, a pretty appropriate and Jewish way to respond. At the same time, if you're dealing with people who are going to say, we don't have any responsibility as a society, when the Nazi Germany, even with all the reparations, they ripped off and stole everything from European Jewry. And in many ways, it helped, even with all the destruction, it helped secure Germany's future. I think we need to make sure that our partner at the other end acknowledges a special responsibility. And the way I would characterize it is, if nothing else, you have to commit to do no harm to Jews. I don't know if you want to be my friend. I don't know if you're going to be a Zionist. I don't know if you're going to support Israel. But anyone who comes forward in your society and talks about doing things that will harm Jews, that's not something that's acceptable. And it shouldn't be acceptable to Germans because they are German. It'll be very interesting to see in Germany, our sister democracy, what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, and what's going to happen in terms of the integration or lack thereof of the Arab and Muslim migrants, because that's going to speak volumes. We can point to, and they're different, but the impacts are quite similar. France, we have pretty much of a disastrous situation with the fractionating of a country. Scandinavia, forget it. I mean, the Jews there, but the combination toxic of traditional anti-Semitism with the Islamist embedding of the most extreme attitudes towards Jews in Israel. I don't think there's much of a future in those countries, and we haven't even talking about Jeremy Corbyn today. So there are a lot of challenges there, but what that also does is it also tells us how much is riding on Germany. If Germany can figure this out, and if we still have a vibrant Jewish community 5 years from now in Germany, that means it's a strong democracy. It can be an example to the rest of the EU. If they fail, I think our concerns about Jewish communities in Europe will just be intensified.